Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to tonight's Joe Chaffee Weather Show on the 8th of October, 2019. And we've got a coastal storm that is going to be impacting the eastern part of the United States. And we have a snowstorm, the second snowstorm of this very, very young fall/winter/early spring snow season. This one, again, for the northern Rockies, second one in 10 days. And this one is also going to impact the northern plains. All of this stuff is kind of weaved together in terms of these systems sort of interacting with each other. And we're going to go through everything with regards to how this is all going to play out in the east, and also for the system that is impacting the northern Rockies and the northern plains. Just finishing up my weather hit on TV and forgot to take my microphone off. So let's get started tonight. Welcome to everybody, as all the regulars are here and a few of the non-regulars. Gregory Corriga, I think you're new, so welcome aboard and thanks for being here. Tim Smart, I'm thinking I have sound, so let me see. My audio is, I'm good from what I can see. And we also have Steve LaPointe on, Johnny Quest, Danny Nankumar, Robert Brown, Mark G, Chuck Cardillo, Johnny Quest, as I said, I think I already said him. I'm just running through back. Martha Gunter is here. Tim Smart, check your audio again. Why am I busy? Good question. Just a lot going on. All sorts of stuff going on with all the weather. I'm just trying to give everybody a quick hello. The chairman, Scott Briller, not here tonight. It is the start of Yom Kippur. So observance of Yom Kippur comes at the end of the 10-day period of starting with Rosh Hashanah, and we wish all our Jewish viewers and participants a good fast, which will end tomorrow evening at sundown. So let's get started here as we take a look at all the interesting factors that we have in play. And first off, we'll go with the watches and warnings, because we aren't seeing too much in the east. I just happened to notice the first coastal flood advisories have been put up for Delaware and southern New Jersey for the high tide coming in tomorrow afternoon. That is going to be the first of many high tides that are going to be an issue with regards to coastal flooding from this storm in the east. I'm thinking that the coastal flooding is going to be minor to moderate in some places. I'm not seeing it being much beyond that because of where this low is going to be. I think it's just going to be too far out to have major impact. That's not to say that some spots aren't going to have a problem, because I think some spots will in the stretch from the Delmarva Peninsula on up through southeastern New England. Those areas in southeastern New England in particular, where the low is going to be just to your southwest for a while, I think you might have a bit more to deal with. But we'll get into that more in a second. All the action in terms of watches and warnings tonight from the Weather Service are up in the northern plains and in the northern Rockies. Much of Montana is under either a winter storm warning or a winter weather advisory, and much of Wyoming is under a winter storm warning, with a few counties extending into northwest Nebraska and western South Dakota, and the rest of South and North Dakota into northwestern Minnesota, all under a winter storm watch. And I don't know about you, but to see such a widespread area of winter storm watches and warnings, you think you were dealing with the storm in December, January, or February, but you kind of have to, wake yourself up to the notion that we are not even to October 10th yet. And this is the second storm, by the way, that they're dealing with up in the northern Rockies at least. So pretty busy. Also, should point out that we do have some winter weather advisories up for parts of Idaho and on up into northwestern Washington, and also some frost and freeze advisories down into Northern California. On the backside of this storm and deep trough, you're going to have some rather cold air that's going to be push down into the western part of the United States. So the outcome, one of the outcomes from a deep storm that heads up into the Rockies and Plains. And again, it's only October the 8th, for God's sake. Now, in terms of precip, over the next 7 days, we'll get our clues from our map from WPC and see what they're thinking. And then we're going to get into a little bit of meteorology after this with regards to forecasting. Now, you can see from their view in the east, particularly in the northern mid-Atlantic and through southern New England, where they think the biggest impact as far as rain is concerned. And this goes back to yesterday's the afternoon European run, which was very bullish with regards to producing strong nor'easter conditions and heavy rains, even back as far west as easternmost Pennsylvania. We thought that model was a bit of an outlier, and for some reason I just never really quite swallowed what it was putting out there on the table for everyone. And today we've kind of seen the models do what they often do, which is react to all these different things going on in the atmosphere until they can finally figure out, and then they settle down into one general solution, and that is to keep the storm center near 70 degrees west, not quite to 40 degrees north, and then kind of have it loop in a counterclockwise fashion and then move out to the northeast. And this is going to take about 4 days, Wednesday through Saturday, to play through. So big rainfall amounts being indicated for much of eastern and southeastern Massachusetts, even nudging up into that southernmost corner of Maine, and some 2-inch plus rains going back to central, and maybe even that back edge could be in western Long Island, with 1.5 inches total rainfall amounts back to about New York City or so. And then you see how it cuts off down into southern New Jersey and points southward, where the rains are much less. Still pretty dry from Virginia down into North Florida. You've got some action for Central and South Florida, some scattered amounts to a couple of inches. Also in the lower, throughout much of the Mississippi Valley, you're seeing some decent rainfall amounts, and even into parts of the southern plains. And of course, you've got the big precip producer with the storm coming out of the northern Rockies to the northern plains. And much of that 3-inch plus precip that's being indicated there, a lot of that could be in the form of snow. Some of it might be in rain in the initial startup phase. And I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if we wind up seeing a few blizzard warnings come out of this with respect to what that low is going to do. So certainly is going to keep us on our toes. So I'm going to go right to the surface map here, and I want to point out what exactly is happening and give you at least a good idea of what's going on in the atmosphere. Why do we have this this particular type of logjam that's producing a big storm in the west, and a rather, I wouldn't say a big storm, but certainly a rather strong low pressure system in the east with a pretty tight pressure gradient. Now, to what you should focus on here is the very interesting layout that we have, and we talked about this today on my Patreon platform for members on my weather in 10, which I think turned out to be about weather in 17. But note the following. First off, we've got this low out here in the central Atlantic. That is a non-tropical low at this point, according to the Hurricane Center. It might have some subtropical characteristics to it. It doesn't really matter in the scope of things. It is a player here. We have our coastal low for this evening. Actually, we have two lows. The one that is developing well east of North Carolina, a second low on the southern tail of that the Hurricane Center mentions, and we actually can see a low-level circulation with that, so that might even briefly become a tropical depression or perhaps even a tropical storm before it gets absorbed by the big low to the north. But you've got these, the two main players, and then the third player in a small fashion is that system on the southern end of the East Coast low. You have the beginnings of the Rockies Plains storm, to the west. And then in the middle of all of this, we have two big highs. So you got this high building now in the northeast and into New England and southeastern Canada, and you have this big high that is centered near the Azores. So what is all this? What is this basically? What are the ramifications of all of this? Well, for one thing, let's assume that we had a normal atmosphere. When I say a normal atmosphere, I would say a west to east atmosphere. And if you remember back last winter, we had a long stretch where we had some storm systems forming off the southeast coast that moved out basically east and northeast and never really had any big impact on the weather in the mid-Atlantic and in the northeastern part of the United States. And the reason for that is there was, we noted this many times back last February and into March, there was a total lack of traffic in the Atlantic. And when I say traffic, I mean other storms running around. It's imperative that you have systems out there somewhere to provide a little bit of resistance. That would encourage storms to find a path of least resistance that would be, say, further north than otherwise would be. And we have such a situation here in that we have this low to the east out in the central Atlantic. There are a couple of logical exit points here for this coastal low. It could move straight east. The problem is that we've got this system here moving west or west-northwest because of this big Azores high. There's a little bit of a weakness here between the two highs, and you would say, okay, well, this could probably want to go toward that weakness, but the problem with that is that the upper high in the east is building in that direction, so that exit route is going to rapidly close. Now, that slows everything down to a crawl here, and at the same time, you've got this deep trough and strong storm system that's forming in the west. Well, that's got no place to go except to sort of drop southeastward and then turn northeastward and almost northward, heading up toward Minnesota, northwestern Minnesota, and up into Canada, somewhere to the northeast of the Minnesota-Canada border. So this logjam essentially is creating a situation where the coastal low is going to have to get only so far north and then just come to a halt, and it's going to have to wait for these players to break down. And when we take a look at what happens going forward on the surface, and I'm going to leave the markings I have so you can see the changes. The high, you see how that high builds across southeastern Canada and out into the Atlantic. The Azores Ridge is still holding on, starting to weaken, but that surface high in Labrador, or that swings over toward between New Brunswick and Newfoundland, now becomes the brick wall, and your surface low, notice, barely moves. If you focus your eye on the surface low off the east coast, it barely moves through all of this because those exits are closed. The Atlantic low, by the way, winds up weakening, and it gets absorbed by the extratropical cyclone that we have off the east coast. So here we are, nearly from Wednesday, from tonight, right now we're at Friday night, and if you look at the way the surface has changed, other than the fact that the Azores high is now weakened, you still have the big high near, now it's moved to Newfoundland, but it takes almost 4 days to get there. And finally, as it does so, you get the system out in the southern plains to make its move, but because that high is so slow to get out of the way, it's lifting up northeastward toward Minnesota, northern Minnesota, and then it just spirals around up there, waiting for everything to break down. Finally, what happens is that the high out in the Atlantic moves out. The Azores high is totally gone, so the high in the Atlantic is allowed to move out, and you finally get this system to exit into the northeast. So you see how the surface, where it does change and where it doesn't change, and how the all these chess pieces, moving amorphous chess pieces, are impacting the four systems that are here. The low that's on the southern end of the trough, that's going to be the that potentially could, if it manages to do it between now and tomorrow morning, because after that it's not going to be able to. Even if that system off the southeast coast does develop, that also winds up getting absorbed into the low that is off the New Jersey coast and south of Long Island. That might give it a little extra zap of energy. So that's something we could certainly pay attention to. But again, a very interesting scenario here with respect to all the players that are involved. Now I'm going to let's roll back and take a look at the surface map, which is busy enough, and this is the 21Z plot. So it's the most recent surface map from 5 p.m. You have yesterday's frontal boundary running up and down the southeast, up and down the coast, and it's made it into North Florida. Temperatures much cooler today down through the Carolinas, at least at 5 o'clock. Most areas are in the 60s to around 70, and the 70s to around 80 when you get into Georgia. You can see how they've analyzed it. You've got the non-tropical low well east of the North Carolina coast, and the tropical low is on the southern tail of this at about 31 north and say roughly at about 75 or 76 degrees west. And in the meantime, there's your surface high, which has moved in to Canada, north of New York State, and getting ready to tighten the pressure gradient. And meanwhile, out in the west, you've got low pressure dropping southeastward, and the cold air that is behind this frontal boundary with the developing low, with temperatures that are now dropping into the 30s and 20s, and you head up into Canada. For the daytime temperatures, you're all below freezing here. So this is a fairly decent shot of cold air that's being dragged down with that deep trough swinging into the western part of the United States. Now, the water vapor imagery, I think, is a good tool to use, so we can actually see the major upper air features that are at work here, and you clearly can see the trough that's out in the west. Sorry, hang on one second. I'm just having a little trouble bringing this down. I want to make this picture a little bit smaller. It makes it a little easier for me to manage. So there you have it on the water vapor imagery. So this, at least we can see those upper air players that are working, and of course stand out is this deep trough here in the west, and you can pretty much put the jet stream where you want, where you just run it here through the stream of moisture. I'm looking at the upper level moisture, by the way, and that is coming into that western part of the United States, fairly deep, and a lot of energy there. In the meantime, you've got another trough right in here, hanging short wave, and this is the system that is off the east coast. So you can see all this moisture feed is running from southern Florida to just off the North Carolina coast to just southeast of Cape Cod. And that's kind of where we're going to be seeing this tracking surface low. And that's why I'm thinking that it's also going to be far enough offshore. This upper trough here, there's probably a little bit of a cutoff low that's going to develop and move to the northeast, to the east-northeast. I think this really does bode well for the idea that the worst of this is going to be offshore. Not that there won't be any impacts onshore and near the immediate coast, but I don't expect to see much impact as you go inland and west of the coastal big cities. Particularly, you go north and west of New York City, you start to head up toward the Hudson Valley, you start to head up into eastern PA. I think the impacts from this are going to be less. It's primarily a coastal event as far as who's going to get reasonable rain, reasonable to big rain, and dealing with gales. But the water vapor imagery is a very good, very useful tool, certainly. And when you want to see where the real weather actually is going on, and how things are going to move. Now, take a look at this satellite loop in the east, because you can see we're going past sunset. But before it does, I'm going to just zoom in and try to get it up close to the center of the picture. But if you look closely, you can actually see the low-level swirl that the Hurricane Center pointed out in their 2 p.m. outlook, and raising the chance that this could become a very short-lived tropical depression or tropical storm as it moves to the northeast. It's embedded in this whole trough that's along the east coast. It's harder to see where the surface low is just based on the satellite with the non-tropical system, but the 21Z map had it east of the North Carolina coast out to about 75 degrees west, and I'm thinking where you see that little flare up there of thunderstorms is probably where it is. It doesn't have that circular swirl look that you often see in well-developed storms. It's not quite there yet. You see the higher clouds are moving southwest and northeast. You can actually look underneath and see some of the lower clouds are moving in more of a counterclockwise way, so you're probably seeing some kind of upper feature there that is beginning to take shape, or at least something at the mid-level. So the bottom line is that the non-tropical system is going to be the dominant one here, and eventually just absorb all this moisture in whatever tropical system, if we get one, from the south. Might give it a little bit of extra juice. So that would be the one thing I might want to look for going forward with this. And the other player, of course, on the satellite loop is the system that is out in the central Atlantic. You can see it there on the upper center of the picture, that big swirl. Clearly it is, it doesn't really look all that tropical. There might be a little bit of convection trying to form around a low-level circulation center there. We'll see what the Hurricane Center says about it in their 8 o'clock outlook, and I think we'll probably be on close enough to where we can take a look at all this. Now, back to the west. Let's go back to the full map and just preview this so we can watch both storms together. We've got the GFS, and this is for 2 a.m. Wednesday morning. Starting to see snow breaking out across Montana, up through Idaho, and even into parts of Washington and Oregon. And of course, you've got the coastal low that is beginning to deepen a bit well east of the North Carolina, Virginia coast, and the pressure gradient between that and the high starting to tighten up. Now, as all the action with the deep trough stays near or west of the Rockies, at least for a while, because the upper features are having a real tough time moving, the surface low here starts to strengthen, and you begin to see arms of rain that'll be rotating back westward or northwestward into southeastern New England, and then eventually going back toward Long Island and toward New York City and to coastal Jersey. You'll notice that it doesn't show that rain getting much further west than that. I have seen instances in cases like this where the models are not good at bringing the western edge of the rain far enough west. So I think you could certainly make an argument that the rain might get to, the New Jersey-PA border on the western end, and maybe to about the Hudson River on the northwest side. But the gradient in terms of the wind is the tightest where you have that heavy precip on the northwest side. So that would be for southeastern Massachusetts, down for the coastal waters, Nantucket, Hyannis, and then over eastern Long Island. I think that's where you're going to see some winds potentially of 50 miles an hour, certainly in terms of gusts. And gales will go back to the Jersey Shore. In the meantime, our storm in the west, you see that surface low dropping southward down into southern Colorado and swinging over into Kansas. So that actually brings some snow into parts of Colorado and into northwest Nebraska, and some pretty hefty precip there in the darker blues in east central South Dakota and eastern North Dakota, with a gradual changeover from rain to snow as you go from west to east. That low is going to deepen as it heads up into northern Minnesota, into the high 980s. And again, I wouldn't be shocked at all if we wind up seeing a few blizzard warnings coming out of this before it's all said and done. All of this, by the way, moving through the next couple of days. This is Wednesday night, Thursday night. Well, we're into Friday morning, and that East Coast low is still there. The high hasn't weakened enough yet, but it's starting to. And finally, that the system out in the plains moves over into the Great Lakes, and you start to get some motion, and you get the surface low out of here as we move through Saturday and into Saturday night. So some improving weather conditions for the northern mid-Atlantic to New England for late in the latter part of the weekend, I think. And then going into next week, it is relatively calm. Models have been pointing to the possibility of something happening late next week in terms of another low. And I was kind of looking at this surface setup and thinking that, oh, this would be kind of cute if this were December or January. Air certainly not cold enough in the east, but the surface look is something that might be conducive for snow, maybe 6 weeks to 2 months from now, but it's not going to happen on October the 17th. But we've got low pressure going out to the south off the Carolina coast and moving to the northeast. We'll see how this evolves. I know a few people were looking at the end of next week at the possibility of another nor'easter type storm. I don't know. We'll see. I get too focused on you've got two major, one moderate to major in the east and one major in the plains and Rockies going on at the same time. It's kind of hard to start now focusing my attention on something 8 or 9 days from now. That's usually my motto is you just take one storm at a time. The western storm, let's look at the what's going on with the upper air. And you can see how deep this trough is. And it just gets forced to dig down into the Rockies like this and cut off and just spin up and around. And again, because of that log jam going on out in the Atlantic, it really, if it wasn't for that, this would probably just swing from west to east as a rather ordinary north-south trough. But it's allowed to achieve quite a bit of depth because of what's going on in the upper air in the east. You have, with that little cutoff low there, southeast of Long Island, you get some ridging along 80 west going up into southeastern Canada. And, of course, you've got this upper high that's sort of built up there as well. So this trough in the west has no place to go but to dig rather strongly down into the northern Rockies. That's a pretty good jet here that comes all the way down and then flies up northeastward toward James Bay. And that's where our upper low winds up lifting. You get this east-west wrapped up. This is very deep, by the way. When I say deep, I mean intense in the upper atmosphere for this time of year. This is a very, very cold system. And then it moves on out over to the east. And here comes the next trough. As it slowly moves east, there's another arm, another shortwave that drops southeastward, and this is for the end of next week where you get the models trying to hint at something, and then another major trough coming into the west there in the long range. It actually, when you look at this a week from now, and again, this picture you see right here in the upper air, that's a week from now. A week from 9 days from now, so this is next Friday. Take a look at this upper air that we have right now. I mean, it's not identical, but this is what we have for Wednesday night, Thursday morning. And then if we jump to next Friday, I'm a little too fast there on the gun, or not fast enough, but here, so 228. So let's go to 30 hours. So you look at the 30-hour forecast in the upper air, and here, I'll even draw it in. That might make it easier. So here's that deep trough out in the west. This is for Wednesday evening, okay? And then you've got this system here in the east, and you've got your jet that is running up this way, up into Canada. And then if we jump over to a little bit further, hang on. Okay, it's not identical, but it sure does rhyme, doesn't it? As we have said many times, it doesn't repeat exactly, but the weather patterns often have a rhyming nature to them. That would suggest that maybe there might be another event, another snow situation developing up here in the northwest and in the northern Rockies and northern plains later next week with whatever deep trough is coming into the western part of the United States. And there might be some kind of low off the East Coast late next week. Might not be the same as this one. Perhaps it'll be something that's further south, in which case the folks in the southeast could certainly benefit from it. It would argue with a flow a bit with something that's a bit more suppressed, that this area here in the southeast and in the Gulf states may finally get the much needed rain that it's been waiting for. Now back to our storm in the northern Rockies. I know I'm jumping around a little bit. My mind is not always settled. I have an idea of what I'm going to do, and then while I'm doing it, I'm thinking, oh, let me show you this. Oh, let me show you that. But let's go back. I want to just bring up the snowfall forecast map, which I thought I had pre-set up, but I guess I didn't. Oh yeah, I did. Is that it? No, that's the watches and warnings. Okay, so here's the snowfall forecast, and I'm going to put the total snowfall amounts here going into, this goes through Friday evening at 8 p.m., and we'll get a wide view. And there's the extent of the snows that are being forecast here, with a large area of 6 to 12, and these are Weather Service the Weather Service offices and their forecasts, which I like to use because when I'm working about snowfall forecasts where I am, I kind of understand how that works because I deal with that climate every day. I don't deal with the climate a lot and the topography in the Dakotas and in Montana, so those local forecasters know it far better than I do. So I will defer to them, and they're shooting for some very big amounts in parts of southeastern North Dakota and north central South Dakota, 1.5 to 2 feet in some places. And if you look at the depth of that low and the amount of moisture that's going to be available to it, it wouldn't be a shocker to me if we wind up seeing something of that nature. Again, I'm kind of astounded to see the early snowfall that is occurring across the United States. It'd be one thing to see it up in Canada. You expect to see it in Canada this time of year. But it is a little bit early to see two snowstorms the two snowstorms that have produced, well, the second one hasn't produced it yet, but will produce. But when this is all said and done, you would have had two snowstorms, one at the end of September, one in the first 10 days of October, where you had a fairly widespread area getting a foot plus of snow. That's kind of odd. I also would caution, don't draw any conclusions out of this, okay? Just because we're seeing this now doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see something down the road. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be a winter for the western part of the United States versus the east. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I just would not draw any, I wouldn't draw any conclusions whatsoever with regards to this. I would just kind of look at this as an anomaly. And if you're a snow lover and you like to track snowstorms, you're getting some bonus here. Okay, so that's a good thing. So hang on one second. I'm going to jump on the chat board here and join all of you. Doug Wetzel, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. We've got a nice crowd of 84 people. We'll see Keith James is here. Patricia Owens. Thanks for both of you being here tonight. And just running back here. California, they're going to shut off power to 800,000 people because of the wind. And they don't want the power lines to knock down and cause a spark, causing fires, and that's in 8 hours. That's odd. That's a new one on me. Well, that was probably one of the issues, I believe, with regards to the fires back. I forgot what year it was. The fires that I think it was at PSE&G or PS Public Service or PGE. I forget. Before I get myself into trouble, whatever one of the California electric companies is. Wound up having to file bankruptcy in order to protect themselves, to get bankruptcy protection because of all the lawsuits that came out of it. So I guess they're afraid that there's going to be a problem with what's happening, of course, with the system in the West. And I'm just trying to see what the in terms of the wind. All right, there you go. So with this big high. All right, so here's what's going on in California. I'll bring up the surface the surface map again. This is for later in the week. Let me just back it up. It doesn't look 84. Okay, so here we go, starting from overnight into Wednesday with this big high coming down. We got a 1033 high in Montana and a 991 low in eastern Colorado. That's a 42 millibar pressure difference in a not too large a distance. And of course the gradient, and there's the impact of the mountains here, which I'm not too familiar with, but you certainly have a tight gradient here up the mountains and then along the California coast. So it does look rather windy with regards to the daytime, increasing winds during the daytime Wednesday, and then going into Wednesday night and even into Thursday starts to relax a bit after that. So I guess they're just trying to be extra cautious with this high coming down. And of course it's bone dry there with the high wet going down east of the Rockies, of the spine of the Rockies, going in that direction. And that creates, I'm imagining there'll probably be a bit of a Santa Ana there down in Southern California. I don't know. Again, I'm not 100% familiar with how everything works down there. It's very hard when you've been East Coast focused for much of your career. So just trying to see what kind. No, it doesn't quite look like anything terribly extreme with terms of temperatures. And of course, the cool air on the backside of that trough goes all the way down. I mean, look how you're seeing temperatures in the teens, single digits, and even below zero Thursday morning in parts of Montana and down in through Utah and Nevada, Vegas down into the 40s, and that cold air really does penetrate pretty far to the south. This is very impressive for this time of year to see air this cold. They're looking at temperatures in the teens and single digits down into Colorado Thursday night into Friday morning. I think that's a 4 above and a 1 above for those 2 points. I'm impressed, to tell you the truth. I'm very impressed. What's the anomaly here? Look at that. I mean, you're talking about temperature anomalies of minus 16 to minus 20 Celsius. So we're talking temperatures running 20 to 30 degrees or more below average throughout the Rockies and Plains and down into Texas. That is some sharp frontal boundary, by the way, with the low up to the north near the Canadian border and the cold front that extends to the south. But this is a very, very strong push of very chilly, very cold air that comes down west of the Rockies and eventually tries to make its way into the east, although it modifies by the time it gets here. But we also have a run of temperatures near or slightly somewhat below average for much of next week and beyond in the eastern part of the United States, because remember, as all of this is getting underway, we're eventually going to wind up with that trough being in the eastern part of the U.S. So a little bit of extra long range in there. Let me come back to the chat here. Hang on, folks. Bear with me. Okie dokie. I am here. Robert Hurley, I just saw a question and I hit a button and the question went away. But your question is still on the chat board. I just have to find it. Mark Gladfelder, thank you for hitting Super Chat tonight. Very much appreciated. Where'd you go, Robert? If you can, just rewrite your question. Oh, here we go. I found it. With the coastal storm just offshore, isn't the block stronger up toward the northeast than the west? I know it's not the same as Sandy. It isn't. It's different. It's completely different. The setup with Sandy. I'll go back to the map and I'll give you a general illustration of what the upper air with Sandy looked like. Okay, and I'm going to do this off the top of my head, so forgive me if it's not exact. And I'm going to use the GFS as a backdrop here. Okay, now first off, Sandy came out of the Caribbean, so that was difference number one. And the second thing is that it came in pretty far from the southeast to the northwest, which made it very unusual indeed. And here we have the upper air for, I'll move it to Thursday. And for one thing, you didn't have this deep trough in the west. Okay, with Sandy, you had a block up in Greenland that caused you to have a very deep, wrapped up upper low down in the southern part of the U.S. like this. Okay, and as a result, again, I'm kind of doing it all out of memory, so it's not exact. So Sandy, which came out, east of the Bahamas, and actually wasn't too far from Bermuda, kind of moved up and then turned and then came in this way, okay, as it responded to this deep upper low that was sitting in the Tennessee Valley. This is a totally different setup. And also, you got to bear in mind that Sandy was a Category 4 hurricane when it was down in this position for a relatively short time, but it was still a Category 4. It pretty much was over open ocean all the way up, pushing all this water, and then as it turned, that water just got pushed into the coastline right here, in this section right in here, okay? So all that water came into this direction. Totally different setup here this time around. First off, your upper low, even if I back this up, okay, you don't have a wrapped up upper low. You have a trough, a shortwave trough, and a southwest flow here along the eastern seaboard, a developing surface low here. And the problem is that the system, again, were it not for all the traffic issues that we talked about earlier out in the Atlantic, this low off the east coast would be going out to the east-northeast, and there wouldn't be any conversation here about it at all. But instead, what we're seeing is the fact that the upper trough, the short wave, is going to get trapped here in the east, right near us, and we're dealing with a non-tropical system here. So you got your surface low is probably somewhere off the coast, right here, let's say, and meanwhile you're getting what tropical development you're getting is on the southern end of this trough, and remember that's going to get absorbed by this dominant non-tropical system because of the upper low. So I know you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, it's coming up from the south, and then it kind of makes this move south westward in its path, but it's a totally different. It's a different scenario in the upper air, and it's not a tropical system. It's not a system that has taken a long track across the Atlantic and pushing all that Atlantic Ocean water. It certainly doesn't have any kind of tropical history to it. So, yeah, you're not going to have the same outcome. Now, here's the close-up view, and I want everybody to just kind of pay attention to this. Look where the surface low is, all right? You see how far out it is on the GFS? That's pretty far out to the east. To have really significant coastal impacts. You are going to have multiple high tides going on here. I think you're going to have minor to moderate coastal flooding with this, but the low's going to do this counterclockwise loop. It gets it back to about 71 west. If there was going to be a problem with this, I would have, if I were a forecaster and I'm thinking, okay, how would this be a problem? Well, it would be a problem if you wind up tracking this much further to the west, say, much closer to Atlantic City, and doing some kind of a loop this way. Or if you were to just take this and move it up northwestward and bring it inland, even as a non-tropical low, this would cause some serious coastal flooding problems. If not over Long Island, if it were to move, west-northwestward over New Jersey. But remember, you don't have that upper flow that is coming from the southeast going this way and pushing it and pulling it or pushing it in that direction. You have instead you've got an upper low sitting here that has this system kind of trapped in it, and then it's just waiting for something to kick it out. So it's just not there with regards to being a more serious threat. I think this is going to be manageable. We're going to probably hear some things about wind gusts of 50 miles an hour or more and a couple of trees being taken out, And again, there's those multiple tide cycles that you got to be a little bit careful with because of the fact that the water will be piling on. Another positive in all of this is the fact that the full moon is not until Sunday the 13th. Okay, so while tides are going to be, they're bottoming right now, they're going to be rising. The mean low water numbers are going to be rising over the next several days, but they don't really peak until after the full moon. So the high tides Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday will be getting progressively higher, but it would have been a lot worse if today was the full moon and we were going into this over the next 3 days. Then I would be seriously concerned about moderate to serious coastal flooding going on along the shore areas from Delaware to southeastern New England. So I think we're catching, we're catching a significant break here in terms of the overall timing with this. Back to the bottom. Let's come back to the board, and let's go. I'm going to roll down on the chat. Oh, Jason Schaefer, I didn't know you weren't feeling well. I'm glad to hear you're doing better. Yes, take all your antibiotics and make sure you finish them. Yes, Patricia Owens. You guys were talking about. Steve LaPointe. Sandy actually made landfall much further south, near Toms River in New Jersey, and what did us in was the high tides and the storm surge. Well, we were to the northeast of the center. So we had the southeast wind, which was perpendicular to the coastline, and that was the worst case scenario. Something that, by the way, many of us were told for many years would never happen, that we would never see a storm come in from the southeast the way Sandy did. And then Sandy did, okay? But a few things people forget. Sandy, storms like Sandy, the 38 hurricane, the hurricanes that occurred in 1954, where we had 3 of them in 6 weeks, those kind of seasons are seasons that happen rarely. I know there's sort of this feeling when you get a storm like of magnitude, you suddenly think that it's going to happen every single year, and it's kind of God forbid if you've been in a car accident, if you haven't been in a car accident in many years, and then you wind up being in one, you feel like the next time you get in the car, you're about to have one again. And then as the days go by, you start to relax, and your memory kind of fades a bit over time, obviously. Otherwise, you would never drive again. Well, this is sort of what happens with these storms. As time begins to pass, you start to realize that, well, no, maybe it's not an everyday thing. Okay, or an every year thing, or an every 5-year thing, or an every decade or 2-decade thing. It might be something that occurs every 50 or 60 years, a once-in-a-lifetime type of event. And yesterday and last night, I had to deal with all these sorts of hysterics from some people because of stuff they're reading on other people's boards that, in my view, was pretty, relatively irresponsible. Some people were just making stuff up. I'll just give you an example, and I guess because my 61-year-old memory has sort of faded here, but this morning I happened to see on a page pop up about surge models showing 4 feet or more of tidal flooding surge, and I responded and I said, could you please, because I don't know what you're looking at. So could you please maybe put the link up to show me what the surge, what model you're looking at? No, not only no response, but now I can't find the page anymore. So I don't know if they just blocked me off completely. I hope they didn't. But I would just, I just wanted clarification of what exactly were you looking at. From what I saw with regards to the next several days, minor to moderate areas of coastal flooding, and that's it. But everybody jumped on that European yesterday, which showed 50-foot waves, coming into the coastline. Come on, we're not dealing with a landfalling hurricane here, but 50-foot waves and gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour, and not just gusts, but even sustained winds of 70 to 80 miles an hour just offshore. And a number of folks looked at that and they kind of just bought it hook, line, and sinker because after all, the European is always right. you forget to forecast. It's just, you can't just, why jump on that model versus the one that has the thing further to the east and out to sea? That's my question. If you're looking at this, why are you going with the worst case scenario over the best case scenario? And by the way, they could both be wrong. Okay, that's the point. That's your job, to try to figure out. The weather person's job is to figure out, what the weather is going to be, and not necessarily tailor their forecast to what what the models are specifically showing. But I think everybody just kind of bit the bullet there. Looking at the European, bringing that surface low so far tucked into the coast, and I'm just kind of thinking that isn't going to be the case. Gary Payne, am I going to do winter forecast for southeastern mountains of Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina? When it snows, Gary, I will. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not yelling out. But when it snows there, I will. But I don't do long range. If you're asking me to do a long range forecast, that is, that's just not what I do, and I'm not going to. I stopped waste. I found it to be an exercise in futility and a complete waste of time on my part. As I've been saying the last couple of days, you don't get website clicks if you write a post saying that the winter in the Northeast I-95 corridor is going to be above normal temperatures with little or no snowfall. Okay, so if you go back and just Google winter forecasts over the last 10 years, and you will find that every single year is an epic snow year for the Northeast and an epic cold winter for the Northeast. It doesn't happen every single winter. Broken clocks are right twice a day, and I will give absolutely zero credit. By the way, I will absolutely give zero credit to most of those long-term range forecasts that are out there, because if it winds up that they get it right this time around. In fact, I would say that I would say that the best thing you can see is if these people would just universally throw in the towel, okay? If they would universally throw in the towel and all come out with forecasts that say that it's going to be a warm and snowy winter, in which case, then I would make sure I have plenty of firewood on hand and that my snowblower was in absolutely perfect working order, because you're going to wind up using it. It's funny how weather, like among other things, can be very humbling to the people who try to forecast it. When they think they have it all figured out, they get thrown, most often enough, they get thrown a big curveball. So that's it. We're going to wrap it up tonight with the very last thing that we're going to look at today. William Huber, you can't get 50-foot waves on the East Coast due to a shallow shoreline. Yes, many miles offshore, correct, many miles offshore. But some people were talking about 50-foot waves hitting the coast. What is this, an earthquake? You're going to have an earthquake tied in with a coastal low? Just stop it. I guess I'm growing very weary of all the weather hysterics, mainly because, then I get bombarded with people, asking me questions and looking for answers, and I really don't want to deal with it, but on the other hand, I don't want to not respond, because that would be rude. So I just, I give them a response, and, the big problem is, the bigger problem is everybody forecast shops, and everybody gravitates to the most apocalyptic conclusion, and then they come back to me and they say, is this apocalyptic conclusion correct? And why aren't you saying the apocalyptic conclusion? Because mainly I don't do apocalypses. Because as I pointed out yesterday, when it comes to an apocalypse, you can only get it right once. All right. So before we go, let's take a look at. I'm going to just look at Hurricane Center to see if they've done anything. All right. So with respect to the system off the southeast coast of the United States, not the non-tropical low in North Carolina, but the one to the southwest of it. A small area of low pressure, 300 miles south of Cape Hatteras. System is likely to producing near gale force winds. Associated thunderstorms have recently decreased. Upper air winds are not particularly favorable for additional development, but it still has the potential to become a tropical depression or storm on Wednesday. But by late Wednesday, the system is forecast to merge with the low off the east coast. They're still keeping a 40% chance that this could knock off a name before it gets absorbed by the east coast low. The one that's out in the central Atlantic has time through Wednesday before upper level winds become unfavorable, and that's because eventually it's going to get involved with the system off the moving toward southern New England that's going to produce some strong upper air winds and eventually absorb this mess that's out to the east. And they're still keeping the main system east of North Carolina that's heading northward at a 10% chance of becoming a tropical depression or a subtropical depression or something along those lines in the next 48 hours, and a 30% chance in the next 5 days. So basically, they have not changed their forecast. Okay, thank you, Howard. I really appreciate it if you would take care of that for me, because I can't seem to find it. Okay, and right, William Uber, a broken military clock is only right once a day. Correct. Okay, so everybody have a great night. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks once again to Doug Wetzel and Mark Glatfelter for hitting Super Chat tonight. Always appreciated on your end and on my end. Thank you so much for doing that. It's a good thing to get a cup of coffee or a cigar out of it at the end of a long day's work. Okay, so here's the schedule for tomorrow. We will have Weather in 5 tomorrow morning. We'll have our live stream tomorrow evening. I'll see if I can get Joe Rayo to come on tomorrow night. During the day, look for website posts. Make sure you got my free weather app, the Meteorologist Joe Chaffee app, and also if you have an Android device, get the Angry Weatherman, which is my buddy Ben Scott's app, as he deals with the weather specific for New York City. So you want to get the Angry Weatherman app on Google Play, and the Meteorologist Joe Chaffee app, which is on both Google Play and on the App Store. And if you already have it, make sure you have the updated version of those apps. Extra coverage of this will continue tomorrow on my weather platform on Patreon, which is my subscription weather platform. It's just $2 a month, folks. If you're weather geeky, it's a good place to be, and that $2 goes a long way to support all the stuff I'm doing, including keeping those apps and trying to update them and getting them to work better and adding additional bells and whistles to it. So thanks so much for those of you who have joined. If weather is something that's very important to your day-to-day decision making, there are higher tiers available so that I can help you along with those decisions. So the link is up there on the chat board. Let me also just very quickly put the free app links to Google Play and the App Store for both apps. I will put those on the chat board as well. And one more thing, an easy way to support my channel is if you shop on Amazon. I have a link to Amazon, and we are a participant in the Amazon Services LLC program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. So when you shop on, use this link to shop on Amazon, buy whatever it is you need to buy. Just use the search bar. You don't have to buy what's on there on my little storefront. You get what you need. Just search for it and go ahead. And Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin so I can get a fishing lure, a cigar, and maybe help pay for managing all that other stuff that I'm doing. So thanks very much for those of you who have supported me in any or all of those ways. And we will see you here tomorrow on the live stream, and tomorrow morning on Weather in 5. Good night, everybody.